It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm amped up to talk with my guest today. Joining me is Marc Miller, CEO of SpearFysh, a very unique sales tool that helps drive improved sales rep performance. One of the problems managers face with improving sales rep performance is about the only set of information they have about the reps is at the end of a deal, when it's all done and they do their post-mortem and look back and try to decipher what happened and what could have been done differently. And it relies in large part really, on the memory of the sales rep and the summary notes they might have created or maybe recreated from memory before they put into their CRM system. So think about what you could do if you had the actual record of the complete interaction with the customer, sort of in real time to help coach the rep or to analyze the interaction for customer cues and intentions and requirements, and it'd be pretty awesome. So that's what SpearFysh does, and Marc is going to share with us how it can be done. Marc, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Andy.
So take a minute, introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Marc Miller. I am the principal of a company called SpearFysh, and that's spelled a little funny, SpearFysh, so fysh.com, spearfysh.com. We started SpearFysh about 4 years ago, and my background before that was I had built a learning company around sales methodology, so it delivered a lot of training over 20 years to commercial sales organizations who all wanted to get on the same page as they face the market, right? They need a methodology or framework, much like you do now, Andy. And although we don't do that anymore, we've developed a technology to help sales organizations, really shift the mindset towards better execution of methodology than the actual methodology itself.
All right, well, let's just jump right into SpearFysh. Tell us what it does and how it works.
Yeah, well, SpearFysh really goes to a place where nobody's gone before, which is the actual sales call. So you could call it a sales call management platform, so to speak. And we work with organizations commercial organizations, typically B2B, who face a major challenge in terms of getting kind of that collective yes from their clients. And we're trying to help them do that more quickly and more often. And typically, that is a team sport that I'll refer to. So you can imagine a client or one of our customers, a sales organization, has many sales conversations with its customers. Those typically occur across a team. So it goes from inside BDM to a field salesperson potentially who might bring a sales engineer to the table who, when they get a deal signed, they've got to implement, right, maybe with the project management team or the professional services team, and then they turn it over to account management. Often, many of those, people coexist with one opportunity. You could have 10 guys working on a $20 million deal. Mm-hmm. What they don't have is a way to, after they have those critical conversations every step of the way, go back and review to see exactly what happened, what was discussed, the specific customer goals or strategies or processes or objectives. There is always a lot lost in translation. What SpearFysh does is capture those critical moments, everything, the entire conversation. But as it captures it, it does it by topic and by important moment discussed. So, essentially what's happening is salespeople are actually marking or tagging the audio, the more essential moments of that call, and then later sending that up to a centralized library or repository where they can review that interaction, but more the high-level points if they want, or the details, share it with their team. Sales managers can actually do coaching from the actual interactions to improve performance, and that asset or those assets, those interaction assets, because they're now structured, which I'll explain in a minute. You've got the ability essentially to improve marketing campaigns and messaging for the marketing guys, and also improve product management around enhancements. There's basically a feedback loop now to the other people in the organization,
Right.
who have an impact on sales.
Right. So I think just to make it abundantly clear, because I think we maybe skipped a point, is your salespeople are recording a conversation with the customer.
That's right.
And are they doing this on their smartphone, or how's that?
Yeah, and so they're using a tablet, and typically
A tablet, okay.
Yeah, but it's not a paper tablet. This is a digital
Yeah.
tablet, like
An iPad, right?
Yeah, like an iPad, exactly. And there's a very cool iPad coming out called an iPad Pro that has a stylus with it, and built for the sales professional or the mobile worker, right? The enterprise, and essentially. The salesperson has a couple options. Number one, we have an ability to create a rapid agenda or a series of questions that tie to their sales process that they prepare for the call. It takes a couple of minutes. They go into the call. They reference those questions. And those questions are kind of color-coded, so easy visual prompts of topics that need to be discussed. A series of tags that represent important moments that, as I hear them, I would touch those, and with the permission of the customer, saying things like, hey Andy, would it be all right if I use my iPad to capture the audio of this conversation? This gets both my voice and your voice, as well as the handwriting, my written notes. Everything is synced up because I don't want you to have to re-explain it later to the next guy. I want to make sure we get the right solutions, and of course everything's confidential. Would that be okay? So the good news is, the customer acceptance to that is very high.
But very high meaning.
Well, depending on the industry, 75% acceptance rate is the lowest that we recorded statistically. 95% is the highest. But I think the way you'd want to look at it around sales call management is, even if they say no, that's okay, because audio is just one element. If you record the audio, you've got 150% of productivity, right? It's just off the charts productivity gain for the sales guy with that data. But if they say no, you still are using SpearFysh, just no audio. You're referencing the agenda or the topics being discussed. You're having a place to take notes. All those notes end up in the CRM automatically. You've got an easy way to get all your data into the CRM without having to do it at a later date. And you've got all your sales guys on the same page around how a sales call is prepared for, how it's executed, and what happens right after a sales call. You've standardized that process as a way to improve it. So,
right.
Regardless of audio or no audio, Andy, it's a winner for sales organizations.
Sure. So on the recorded audio, just to give listeners a complete picture of sort of what happens is, because I think this is really interesting, is so you record it on a iPad, on a tablet, you upload it to the cloud. Is the way that most people interact with it after that as a transcription, or listening to the audio itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's go in the day in the life. I've done my sales call. I've captured the audio, of course, with the permission of the customer, which is no big deal. And then when I hit done, really what happens is that interaction in entirety, the questions, the tags, all my notes, and the audio goes up to our centralized web services platform that the customer, right, multi-tenant, they would own their own space in there. And all those voices convert to text. Mm-hmm. And our technology knows the voice of the salesperson versus the voice of the customer, which is going to lead to some interesting data points later on. And a lot of that data automatically ends up in the CRM, like Salesforce.com, just automatically, so the salesperson doesn't have to put that data in later on. So now, let's say it's...
Well, do they put the whole conversation in, or...
Well, into the CRM, there's a link that's automatically embedded into the activity record of that account mm-hmm. or that opportunity. That as I click on that from, let's say, a CRM like Salesforce, it automatically opens up the notes, and that's where you would review the data. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about that piece. So let's say it's a couple weeks later. Now the salesperson has got to put together a presentation or a proposal. They would see their notes. They actually would hear the audio, and they actually see themselves writing their notes or keyboarding in their notes because it's synced up with the audio. And wherever they click on their notes, the audio jumps to that moment in time. So the notes actually mark the audio. And then if they just want to review the topics that were discussed, there's a tab there where you can go into the questions that you asked. And if you just want to hear the answer to the questions, you just click that question, and you'll hear the customer giving you their answer on some of their problems or dissatisfaction or goals, whatever that question was related to.
So your system recognizes questions when they're asked then, and extracts them.
It does. It does. So what it really does, if you think about it, is it takes, let's say the average sales call, it's an hour long, right? I mean, and like a discovery call. And so that would equate to about 7,000 spoken words. And so, basically, we take those 7,000 words and we break them all down by the topic discussed, by the question that was asked. We actually synthesize that data to learn from it so that we can get a sense for the ratio of talking to listening. We can get a sense for how many problems are discussed in the call or how many goals. And then what we can do is basically look at what the star performers are doing versus the core performers, analyze those calls, as a way for the client to improve the kind of the core performers and narrow that productivity gap.
Right. So how does a sales manager on sort of a real-time basis use SpearFysh to coach their people? Are they going in and looking at the calls, every day? Yeah. I mean, how's that tend to work?
Well, it's a great question. So what would happen is the sales manager would get a report, right? So let's say a weekly report or whenever they would want to get it, and it would basically give insight into what's going on in the sales calls, for instance, by stage of call. So maybe a sales manager would see, I want to see, what's going on in my sales team's effectiveness around creating demand, right? Kind of that first third of the cycle where you've got to go in and find and grow dissatisfaction and uncover customer goals, let's say. And so I just want to get a sense for what's going on in those calls around, the ratio of talking to listening in those calls with my people, how many problems are being discussed, or by the prospect or the customer, how many times my salesperson brings up a certain problem. And then I want to maybe get a sense for in that report, does my salesperson jump in with a solution right away to a found problem, or do they kind of explore consequences or implications? I want to get a sense for the length of those calls, by the way, which is really important. So there's all kinds of, so we basically, every sales call is run through our software, and basically it's broken down into elements that you can put into a report that really tell a sales manager who needs coaching, what's working well in the sales org, what's working not so well, what's leading to more unsuccessful sales calls. And they just see it there in a report. Now, then that report would, send them immediately to coachable moments, in sales calls, so they can actually hear, actual instances, audio sound bites of calls that happened a week, 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, as a way then to give feedback to those salespeople about how to improve performance. So we actually have a way with it when they're, we drive them to coachable moments. So a sales manager doesn't have to listen to the whole hour call. They might listen to 5 or 10 minutes because we pointed them to that 5 or 10 minutes, and then they would write an annotation right on the digital sales call as a way to give salespeople feedback. And the key of this, as you know, Andy, is that feedback is really what moves the needle when you're trying to train salespeople how to improve their complex interpersonal skills or their strategies. And so now you've got a way to shine a light into those areas that really are working. So if your feedback wants to be positive, hey, that was great, you've made that change, congratulations. Or if that feedback is more, hey, how do we make you better here? Sales managers have a way to give that feedback without the expense and the obtrusiveness of having to go out in the field, observe sales behavior with scotch tape on their mouth, which they don't do very well.
Not at all.
And give feedback when they want to jump into calls, which kind of ruins the coaching moment. So this is a much more effective, cost-effective way to deliver feedback to salespeople. It also increases the volume of feedback to salespeople. So that really translates to much faster onboarding of new hires, because in most sales environments we work in, commercial selling environments, mid to long selling cycle, it probably takes at least a year for salespeople, maybe 7 months to a year before they're kind of comfortable. Then it might take another year before they're really hitting, really good productivity gains and their unconscious competence. So this reduces all that significantly because, it's really their lack of experiences that it's really their lack of experiences that lengthens time to proficiency.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
people learn through observation, so this is just a way to accelerate the observation, even though they're not in person, but they're still observing it and hearing both sides of the interaction.
Yeah, you got it. So it's it gets our technology, I think, or our tool. I think about it more as a tool. Really opens a lot of interesting questions. Like, number one, what's the quality of the coaching feedback sales managers are giving? Is it really good feedback? Is it maybe a little erratic that it falls outside the selling process? Gee, can other people in the organization become virtual sales coaches? Can the sales trainers now tie into some of those sales calls because they would be really good coaches? And we all know at the end of the day, that sales managers, their ultimate job is to make their people better, right? To improve their performance. But I think the biggest challenge is that has a tendency to fall to the bottom of the ladder. From a sales enablement perspective, sales managers are so busy doing other things, to help meet the quarterly numbers, jumping in on sales, doing all the paperwork. The last thing they're doing is coaching, which is probably the most important thing.
Well, it's the number one thing they should be doing, right?
You got it, but they just don't have the time, and it's not their fault. So we're giving them a tool that
well, that could be a whole conversation we could have about whose fault it is and whether they have time or not. But yeah, let's go ahead. We'll accept your premise for now, but not that I necessarily agree with it.
Well, what's the premise of what?
Well, that they don't have time for coaching.
Well, yeah, but we both agree that the coaching is really important, and I think we're trying to give them a tool that eliminates, the barriers of time, right? All those time constraints that they might manifest or complain about, they just don't have time to do. Now, you can do a lot of one-on-one, very personal coaching on real-time performance, with your pajamas on and on your computer, and giving people a lot of quality feedback to move the needle. I mean, you are a sales manager now who has been empowered. And by the way, it is an interesting subject because, the feedback doesn't necessarily that's going on in sales calls, what's working, what isn't. A lot of that feedback can go directly to salespeople, right? I mean, because, what you find is if you're giving salespeople good feedback, you don't care where it's coming from. That if they can see reports that would say, hey, Tony, you're talking too much in sales calls. Tony, you find half as many problems as our star performers in your average discovery call. If they're getting direct feedback from that, salespeople have a tendency to autocorrect, right? I mean, they can become their own coaches. So we think that's an interesting dynamic too, or pairing them up with other salespeople who can help coach them up. So I think, the whole idea there is, how do you improve performance? And it just doesn't have to be through sales coaching with our tool.
Right. Okay, we're going to take that. We're going to take a quick break. With me today is Marc Miller, CEO of SpearFysh, SpearFysh.com. Make sure people get that Y in there. And he's come back and talk to us some more about their very interesting product. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Andy. Connect and Sell is used by sales reps at nearly 1,000 companies, including hundreds of technology startups and several Fortune 500 companies, to overcome the challenges of getting prospects on the phone. Companies using Connect and Sell grow their revenues faster by enabling their sales reps to have more sales conversations in 90 minutes than they could otherwise achieve in an entire week. Connect and Sell can be deployed directly to your sales reps, or you can take advantage of their outbound on-demand service, which delivers qualified prospect meetings scheduled directly on your sales reps' calendars. Visit connectandsell.com to learn more about how Connect and Sell can start filling your pipeline today.
Hi, welcome back. My guest today is Marc Miller, CEO of SpearFysh at SpearFysh.com. That's spelled SpearFysh.com. So I have a hypothetical scenario for you, which has almost nothing to do with SpearFysh, but I ask this question of all my guests. So you're a new sales manager. You've been brought into a company whose sales have stagnated, they're sort of stalled, and upper management is really urgent for things to change. So what two things would you do in the first week that would have the biggest impact?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question. I think any good sales manager, first thing is try to wrap my arms around what we have, and I think that I would want to get a sense for, do we have a common methodology or framework around market facing? I mean, to me, are we all on the same page? Do we agree on those steps to how we're going to create demand, how we're going to get to a consensus yes with the larger buying group? And that's where a lot of things really bog down today, right, with all the decision makers. But do we have a consistent process in place that has research behind it that works? That'd be my first thing. My second one that I would want to answer very quickly is, okay, we've got the process in place with the strategies and with the skills we expect, right? Mm-hmm. But how do we know people are doing it? So I would want a second step in there that would say, how can we enable the sales team with tools that add transparency to what's going on in the field as a way to ensure proper execution of that sales discipline? So those would be my two.
Okay, good answer. So back to SpearFysh.
So there was a wrong answer on that?
Well, no. Well, actually, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. There's just answers, right?
Just answers. I was just teasing.
But it goes, it differs widely, the prescriptions, based on the people's backgrounds, my guest backgrounds, and their experiences and their inclinations. So, and that's, there's no one right answer for everything, but ultimately we're going to compile these and see what sort of floats to the top in terms of most popular. But
I got you.
So for people that are listening, give them a sense of the profile of your ideal customer. What's the profile of a company that's using SpearFysh today?
Yeah, I think they're they're dissatisfied with the status quo. I think it's leadership who's probably frustrated with the fact that we get a fair amount of opportunities, but we're losing too often. They're not satisfied with that win rate. They see the major barrier as often just losing to the status quo, not so much the competition. If they lose to the competition, it's because we're denigrating to the the lowest common denominator price. We're losing on price, so we're losing our margins. And I think they're frustrated with that. I think they're probably a little more advanced around the use of technology. They understand how technology can leverage productivity. So they've already probably employed a CRM or have tried that. They have found out that that's a record management system that doesn't really affect sales effectiveness as much as they would like. I think they're skeptical of new things, as they should be. They're skeptical of adoption. But at the end of the day, they're go-getters, they're change makers, and they're learners, right? I mean, these are people that like learning and trying new things, and they're change masters in their own organization.
Well, so how do they evaluate whether this is the right solution for them at this point in time? And more importantly, is how do they determine what the ROI is on their investment in an app like SpearFysh?
Yeah, I think. I think they're probably the use cases that draw them to SpearFysh is that they're hiring new people, and that turnover is a little too high. They want to onboard them more quickly, right? That time to proficiency is critical. I think they're probably either they've already migrated to or in process of migrating from products to solutions, and the conversations are getting more complex as a result. They need salespeople who can execute fluently the new solution conversations every step of the way. And I think they're frustrated because they don't necessarily know how effective those conversations are. They have to rely on salespeople to tell them what happened, which is a problem all by itself. So I think those are two.
Right. So we're talking about somebody with an outside sales force, because we're looking primarily at these interactions, because you can record telephone calls obviously today. So really for people who are out in the field meeting the customers, you said sort of increasingly complex sales, do you see it tending more, it's more oriented by how complex the product is versus the size of the company that's employing it, right?
It's not really, it could be SMB, small company, it could be medium-sized, could be enterprise. I think that's right. It's more probably the size of the solution. To me, it's more of a commercial B2B sale. It's probably they're selling solutions that are on average $10,000 or $20,000. I think that they're also probably very concerned about churn, right? Customer retention is important. Customer retention, because they're moving more towards recurring revenue models, and they're also very concerned about messaging. I mean, and by the way, all the way from that the marketers and the product managers are getting the messaging right, that insight up front that can be delivered by the sales team or by the marketing channels, right? So they're very concerned. I think what they ought to be concerned about, and I'm not so sure they are, the sales org got to be really concerned that, there's feedback coming from those sales calls to the marketing guys and the product managers, because those guys are building the front ends. They're the early engagers, of the prospects, before the sales guys get a hold of them. And you don't want to shut those guys out of, those rich conversations that happen on a daily basis. So what you want is a whole end-to-end machine built, obviously, right? Right. That not only ensures that, hey, we're getting enough opportunities, the efficiencies, but when we show up in front of those opportunities, we're highly effective and we're getting better every day, because we're leveraging the wisdom of our own tribe, right? We know what our star performers do. We've got it captured. We've got it into little bite-sized pieces and a little audible components so that we can share those with the new people as a way to improve their performance. And, so as our business models change faster and faster, we adapt quicker. And I think, sales organizations today, what they need to be thinking about is, the digital tools, whether those are mobile tools, whether that are used in the field or on the phone. But I think they ought to be thinking about that conversation they're having with customers and prospects as a new asset that, if captured, can take productivity to whole new levels of their organization.
And how are you gauging? I mean, I agree 100%. So how are you gauging productivity? How are you measuring that?
It depends on the client, because every client, like we just had a client who, the way they measured us, it's probably the largest technology company in the Midwest. So it's an enterprise company. They're selling as a team sport where they have inside people setting the appointments, qualifying, hand off to the field, hand off to the sales engineers, or bring them to the table. And they were interested in three things. They were interested in, number one, this new sales methodology that they had employed. They wanted to measure whether people were actually executing on that new methodology, because they had spent a lot of money there training salespeople, but they didn't think that it was being adopted very well. At least they weren't sure. The second, they wanted to have an easier way to get data into Salesforce.com, and because compliance was a real issue there, around the records management, call summaries. And third, they wanted to make it easier for their sales managers to do coaching, specifically kind of field/curbside coaching, on sales calls, actually whether those happen in the field or on the phone. They wanted an easier, more effective way to do that, to give feedback to salespeople to improve performance. So those were their three things. We put metrics behind those measures, which you can do with a lot of different ways, but those were the three areas that we drove in that particular organization. So everybody's a little different. I mean, one we just did, their average solution size was like, I think it's almost $100,000. It's a big marketing platform, and their whole focus with us is win rate. And right now, their failure rate, we'll reverse it, is 92%. So from every initial lead they get to getting a closed deal, they only win 8% of those. Maybe, and they want to double that, right? They want to get that closer to 15-20%. And every percent is worth a lot of money, right, to the client. So our entire focus with them is, from an end-to-end standpoint, helping them get closer to a 20% win rate. A little different metric, but one that most sales organizations are interested in.
Yeah. Well, also it sounds like they should be targeting their leads better, but that's a whole other conversation. So,
Yeah, you're right. But actually, they're very disciplined.
right.
It's really interesting to observe those guys. They're very, very disciplined, and they, again, here's a typical one where they do a great job, where we've seen with the data of creating the demand for their marketing platform with a champion, and then getting it in front of a that person then gets 5 or 6 or 7 of the buying team, like this, the executives
right.
and the market. They get them all at the table, and then it's people are excited when they see it. They say, hey, that's really good. That's definitely better than the way we're doing things. But that isn't. But a lot of times those deals just evaporate, even though the buyer says it's good and it's a better way of doing things. Because I think buying is just becoming more dysfunctional in organizations today, because everybody's got to weigh in, and there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, especially the legal cook and the IT cook, right? They can bog things down. So the data, it was interesting, right? And them working through that issue, as a way to solve that problem with our technology. So kind of interesting process.
Great. So we're moving to the last segment of our show, which is some rapid fire questions for you. And you can give me one-word answers. You can elaborate as much as you want, within reason, I guess. So are you ready for a few questions?
Go for it.
So what's the most powerful sales tool in your arsenal?
When I come in, I open 4 browsers, right? One is Google. I still use Google. Second is Salesforce.com tab. Third is LinkedIn, and fourth is SpearFysh. I mean, those are my 4 portals to the world, and those are, frankly, the 4 technologies that I am just in constantly.
Okay. Who's your sales role model?
Neil Rackham, who was the author of Spin Selling and did research back in the 80s that I thought was the most prominent research of its time. I thought it really broke through selling, and he's an idiosyncratic, wonderful guy. I don't think many of us could do better and have a role model like him.
Okay. What's the one book that every salesperson should read?
I've read your book, Zero Time Selling. I thought that was very good. I've written a couple books. One was A Seat at the Table. One was Selling is Dead. My books are considered bestsellers, as yours is. And I liked Rackham's earlier work. I think The Challenger is good work. It's based on survey data, and there's some new work coming out from Challenger, I think, that is very, very good work as well.
Okay. So multiple books in there, and if you're looking up Marc's book, it's M-A-R-C, Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R, on Amazon. So what's your favorite music to listen to psych yourself up for an important sales call?
Oh, gosh. That's I'm a total indie guy, right? So, yeah. And I love Spotify. So I'd say I'm going to go more towards the platform.
What's on your Spotify list?
Oh, I was just listening to it earlier because I was reading. I'm so eclectic. I got so much stuff. All I know is I've got 6 kids. Most of them are in their 20s, and when they look at what I've got on Spotify, it's like the stuff that they're listening to. I never know the names of any of the songs. I just listen to the music. So, like, my first song is the Dandy Warhols, Wild Club, Crowded House, Langhorne Slim, Bell and Sebastian, Airborne Toxic. So a lot of stuff people have never heard of.
You're going back and forth, generations there. That's pretty cool.
Crazy stuff, yeah.
Got some older stuff, got some newer stuff. Excellent. Okay. So what's the one most important thing a new salesperson or an inexperienced salesperson should focus on to improve?
Yeah, I don't think that's changed. And I think it's, I heard this analogy a while back. I wish I could attribute it, but I think that we're all in the jungle, right? But the jungle's getting more complicated. The competitors are getting more complicated. Business models are getting more complicated. The conversations are getting more complicated. So I think that what you need to understand as a salesperson is you need to figure out where that other guy is in their part of the jungle, right? You need to stop. You need to figure out, their objectives, how they're measured, their priorities, where they're hitting walls, what's important to them. And I don't think that's changed, but I think it's sometimes an overlooked area. And if you can figure out where they're at in their part of the jungle and communicate where you're at, you can kind of figure out if there's a horse in there it's always been a good analogy for me, never to kind of lose sight of that.
All right. So last question. What's the one question you get asked most frequently by salespeople?
How do customers feel about recording audio? Like, how are my customers going to accept that?
Yeah.
And the answer is, it doesn't matter. If you ask the right way where customers, understand the benefits to them, the acceptance rate is high. But if a sensitive situation, maybe you don't want to use it, or customers would say no for some reason, that's totally good, because, you still want to use digital tools when you're taking your notes, because then it becomes an asset for the entire team. Either way, you win. And so although that's the question I get asked a lot, the answer sometimes isn't really about audio. It's about standardizing in a sales team how data is captured in a sales call so it become an asset to improve performance.
Right. And I think you bring up an interesting point you brought up a couple times. I just want to reiterate it for people that are listening, especially CEOs, senior executives, is that this information that your salespeople are gathering on sales calls is a corporate asset. It's not their personal asset. The sales reps, it's a corporate asset. And as you said, capturing it digitally really helps improve the odds that it gets into the system and it is an asset that can be shared and used to analyze opportunities and improve the performance of the sales reps, as opposed to chicken scratches on a notepad that never get entered into your CRM system.
Yeah, and if you're going to go hardware-wise, because it's always a good question. It's like, I'm going to tell you, you look at these new generation of tablets coming out. The Microsoft Surface Pro tablet is great. I think what's going to be greater now is the iPad Pro that's coming out in November of 2015. So in 2 months, because this is October, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or so. But the point that is going to be an incredibly powerful enterprise tool, the ultimate mobile device that actually has a stylus with it, and has a great keyboard, and it's larger than a normal iPad. But that's going to be the tool you're going to want to carry around, and you're going to look professional to a customer. Your company's going to look like they really have their act together from a technology standpoint, and you're going to become a publisher of content as a salesperson. Salespeople don't see themselves that way, but they really need to, because that's the world that we live in. That's the social media world, where we're publishing content, we're sharing content, we're analyzing content as a way to get better every day. And for the first time, that hardware really is going to be available that goes into sales calls with you, and salespeople are kind of the maestros and the artists, and they're creating new kinds of content that only makes them better but makes everybody else better, right? And the whole idea here is, we is smarter than me. The old days of selling was all about me, the cowboy who did it all, got in the doors, created the demand, put the proposal together, blah, blah, blah. Those days are over. We are now collaborators. We're more of a pit crew, right, than we are the cowboy model. And as such, we need collaborative social media tools. We need to really change our game, as a way to add more value to our customers and our own organizations.
Great. Well, I want to thank today's guest, Marc Miller, CEO of SpearFysh. Marc, please tell folks how they can find out more about SpearFysh.
Absolutely. Go to www.spearfysh.com. Again, SPEARFYSH, not FYSH.com. We actually have my second book, which was A Seat at the Table. We have a giveaway here. So if you go to spearfysh.com/giveaway, you can download the PDF from my second book, A Seat at the Table. We're happy to do that. And I think that's probably the best way to begin exploring what SpearFysh is all about beyond this podcast.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today. And remember, everyone, make it a part of your day, every day, to deliberately learn something new to help you amp up your business. Subscribing to this podcast is an easy way to do that, because you want to make sure you don't miss any of our conversations with top sales experts like our guest today, Marc Miller, who share their experience and expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining us, and until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.